There is a kind of person you pass on the street every day without knowing what they carry. They show up to work, answer their emails, smile at the right moments, and move through the ordinary choreography of life as if nothing inside them has ever truly broken. But something did break, and they are still here. You might recognize them by how they listen, not waiting for their turn to speak, but genuinely present. The way they hold space in a room without needing to fill the silence. There is a steadiness about them that doesn't come from never having been hurt. It comes from having survived the kind of hurt that reorganizes a person at the cellular level. This is not about resilience in the way we usually celebrate it. It's not the triumphant comeback narrative we see in movies where the hero emerges stronger and ready to conquer the world. This is something quieter, deeper, more complicated. This is about what happens to the human psyche when it encounters pain so extreme that it cannot simply be endured. It must be integrated, metabolized, and somehow made part of a life that continues. If you recognize yourself in this description, you are not alone. If you are watching this because someone you love carries this kind of strength and you want to understand them better, that matters too. Because there is a hidden architecture to survival, and understanding it might be the first step toward understanding yourself. The truth is, extreme emotional pain does not simply hurt, it dismantles. It reaches beneath the ordinary sadness and daily stress that everyone knows and instead unravels the quiet assumptions that a person has built their entire life around. The belief that relationships are safe, that effort will be met with care, that the future will resemble the past. When profound betrayal, abandonment, loss, or psychological trauma occurs, these assumptions don't just crack. They shatter all at once, and that shattering is the beginning of something that psychology has only recently begun to understand with any depth. When a person encounters extreme emotional pain, the kind that comes from broken trust, devastating loss, or deep relational wound, something happens that most people never talk about. The nervous system doesn't simply enter a state of sadness or fear. It enters survival mode. The brain is flooded with the understanding that the world is not what it believed it to be. The people you trusted are capable of harm. The future is not guaranteed. Safety is conditional. And your sense of self, which was always built on certain assumptions about the world and your place in it, can no longer hold its original shape. This is called psychological disorientation, and it is far more destabilizing than most people understand. In ordinary life, we move through each day with an invisible map. This map tells us how the world works. It tells us what to expect from people. It tells us what we are capable of. It tells us that if we do the right things, invest in the right relationships, work hard toward the right goals, we will be safe. We will be loved. We will matter, we will belong. When extreme emotional pain occurs, that entire map is suddenly revealed to be incomplete. Or worse, completely wrong. The person finds themselves in a landscape that looks familiar on the surface, but feels fundamentally altered. They walk into rooms they've walked into 1,000 times, and nothing feels real. They sit across from people they love, and feel a distance that cannot be explained. They look in the mirror, and the person looking back no longer feels continuous with the person they were yesterday. This is the disorientation, and it runs deeper than grief. A grieving person mourns something lost. But a person in the aftermath of extreme emotional pain must confront something far more destabilizing: the possibility that they never fully understood the nature of reality or other people, or themselves. The assumptions they built their identity upon have become unreliable, and the self that was constructed on those assumptions cannot simply continue unchanged. Psychologically, what's happening is this: the brain has systems designed to manage stress, predict threats, and maintain a coherent sense of self. These systems work beautifully under normal conditions. But when emotional pain becomes extreme, when the threat or loss overwhelms the brain's ability to process it through ordinary means, something different happens. The processing systems become saturated. The meaning-making apparatus, which usually helps integrate difficult experiences, simply cannot metabolize something this large. For a time, the person becomes fragmented. They might describe feeling like they are watching their life from outside of it, or like they are moving through their days on autopilot, while some essential part of them remains frozen at the moment the rupture occurred. This is not metaphorical. The brain has actually restricted access to the full range of emotional and cognitive resources in order to focus entirely on endurance. The nervous system has made a calculation: survival first, everything else later, and so the person continues. They get up, they shower, they go to work, they respond to messages, they perform the function of being alive. But inside, there is an invisible rupture, a gap between the self that presents to the world and the self that is struggling internally with questions that feel unanswerable. Who am I now that this has happened? What remains of me when the things I built my identity on have proven fragile or false? Can I ever truly trust again? Can I ever feel safe? In the immediate aftermath of extreme emotional pain, these questions remain largely unspoken and unprocessed. The person is in survival mode. Accessing them fully would require emotional resources that are currently directed entirely toward the basic task of continuing to exist. But they are there, underneath everything, shaping how the person moves through each day. There is a kind of psychological heaviness that comes with this. Not the sadness that everyone understands and recognizes, a different kind of heaviness, the heaviness of carrying something that cannot be spoken about easily. The heaviness of maintaining a public self that appears relatively functional while the private self is fundamentally disoriented. Many survivors describe this period not as pain but as numbness and emptiness, a feeling of being hollowed out. This is often misunderstood as depression, and it may include elements of depression, but it is something more specific. It is the psychological consequence of the brain entering a state of sustained survival mode. When all resources are redirected toward endurance, the experiences that make life feel meaningful, joy, connection, curiosity, hope, become temporarily inaccessible. What remains is the basic mechanics of functioning, and underneath that, a kind of waiting. The psyche is waiting to know if it is safe enough yet to ask the deeper questions. Is it safe enough to feel? Is it safe enough to begin to integrate what has happened? Is the ground solid enough beneath my feet to look around and take stock of what has been destroyed? This waiting period is crucial, though it often goes unrecognized. During this time, the mind is reorganizing itself. New neural pathways are forming. The brain is learning how to exist in a world that is no longer predictable according to its old maps. This self is learning how to survive when the assumptions that held it together have become unreliable. And then, gradually, something begins to shift. It is not a sudden awakening or a moment of clarity. It is more like the very slow dawning of consciousness after a long darkness. The nervous system gradually begins to release its stranglehold on resources, not because the threat has passed, but because the mind has determined that it is sustainable to carry both the memory of pain and the effort to continue living at the same time. This is when the actual work of reconstruction begins. Before this point, the person has been in collapse. In survival, in fragmentation, What comes next is something that psychology calls meaning making, not in the sense of finding a silver lining or discovering that the pain was actually beneficial. That would be a dangerous myth. Rather, it is the process of beginning to ask, where does this experience belong in the story of my life? What does it say about me? What does it say about the nature of other people and the world? These are not easy questions. And the answers that emerge are often painful in their clarity, but they are necessary, because a self cannot remain fragmented indefinitely. At some point, the psyche needs to reorganize itself around a new understanding of reality. It needs to reconstruct itself as a coherent being, even if that being is profoundly different from who it was before. The pain, which once felt like it would consume everything, begins to be integrated, not forgotten. Not healed away as if it never happened, but placed, understood as one chapter in a longer story, a chapter that altered the trajectory, yes. That changed the shape of the self, absolutely, but a chapter that is no longer the only thing the story is about. It is during this phase of reconstruction that something emerges that outsiders can finally begin to recognize and name, a kind of strength that did not exist before. Not because pain is ennobling, but because the process of surviving extreme pain, processing it, and reorganizing oneself around it, requires an extraordinary mobilization of psychological resources. The person has been forced to confront reality at a depth that most people never reach. They have been forced to question their fundamental assumptions about safety, trust, identity, and the nature of other people. They have been forced to develop new ways of coping, new ways of relating to their own emotions, new ways of understanding themselves. And if they have been supported through this process by therapy, by people who witness their pain, by their own internal resilience, they emerge not unchanged, but reorganized. The self that emerges is not a return to what was before. It is something entirely new, built not on the fragile assumptions of the old self, but on the evidence of having survived something that once felt unsurvivable. This is where we find ourselves at a crucial turning point. The person who has survived extreme emotional pain finds themselves standing at a threshold. Behind them lies the collapse, the fragmentation, the disorientation. Ahead of them is the possibility of a reorganized self. But to cross that threshold, something must shift, not just in how they think, but in how they perceive themselves and the world around them. One of the most profound changes that begins to emerge is a fundamental alteration in emotional perception. Before the pain, many people experience emotions in relatively straightforward categories. Sadness is sadness. Fear is fear. Joy is joy, clean, simple, separate from one another. But after extreme emotional pain, something deeper happens. The survivor's inner emotional world becomes layered and textured in ways that most people never experience. Having moved through states of despair, helplessness, abandonment, and profound grief, they no longer experience feelings as isolated events. They acquire weight, nuance, contradiction. A moment of happiness can now coexist with an awareness of its fragility. Relief can sit alongside the memory of what was lost. Compassion can arise quickly because the survivor recognizes echoes of familiar pain in others. This is not sentimentality. This is a more accurate and honest perception of what it means to be human. With this expanded emotional awareness comes another shift, heightened perception of others. Having navigated their own intense internal states, survivors become remarkably sensitive to subtle cues. A shift in someone's voice, the way a body holds itself, the meaning in what is not said. They can sense distress before it is spoken aloud. They understand contradictions within another person's feelings because they have lived inside such contradictions themselves. And importantly, this depth softens judgment. When someone has personally experienced psychological collapse, the struggles of others no longer appear as weakness. They appear as what they actually are, understandable responses to unseen burdens. The survivor knows this in their bones because they have lived it. This is where a critical reframing occurs. The pain that once felt like pure destruction begins to reveal a hidden function. It has opened the person to a wider, deeper understanding of human experience. It has made them more accurate in their perception, more genuinely kind, not from performance, but from actual understanding. But alongside this deepened perception comes something else. A fundamental change in how survivors understand other people and human nature itself. Before profound betrayal or loss, many people carry quiet illusions about human reliability. The belief that care will be reciprocated, that loyalty is stable, that love protects against harm. When these expectations are shattered, the injury is not only emotional, it is philosophical. The person must confront a more complicated, more realistic understanding of what human beings actually are. Survivors frequently emerge from this with fewer illusions. They recognize that people can be both loving and limited, devoted and inconsistent, sincere yet capable of harm. But here is the crucial truth. This realization does not usually lead to cynicism. For many survivors, it produces something far more stable, sober acceptance. They no longer demand perfection from others because they have witnessed how vulnerability, fear, and self-interest shape human behavior. They understand that people are not heroes or villains, but complex beings doing their best with incomplete information and competing needs. This clarity, paradoxically, deepens their capacity for genuine connection. They know that trust is meaningful precisely because it is not guaranteed. They recognize that care must be mutual to endure, and so their view of human nature becomes grounded, neither naive nor bitter, realistic and compassionate at once. Alongside this shift in perception comes another profound change, the emergence of stronger psychological boundaries. When someone has experienced violation, abandonment, or emotional neglect, they are forced to confront a difficult truth that transforms their entire internal landscape. Safety cannot depend entirely on others. The self must learn to be its own primary source of protection. This shift rarely appears as dramatic assertiveness or sudden anger. More often, it develops quietly through accumulated recognition. The survivor begins to notice what feels harmful, what drains their energy, what compromises their dignity. Situations and relationships that were once tolerated out of hope or fear begin to register differently. There is less willingness to override internal signals for the sake of approval or attachment. Boundaries form not from anger, but from clarity, from knowledge, from the lived experience of having paid the price of poor boundaries and having survived what happens when you do. Alongside this boundary formation comes something equally profound, the emergence of genuine self-trust. Having endured what once seemed unendurable, the individual carries lived evidence of their own resilience. They know, not as an abstract concept, but at a bodily level, that they can survive emotional rupture. They can survive loneliness. They can survive uncertainty. This knowledge does not remove fear, but it transforms fear's meaning. Fear becomes something that can be navigated rather than a force that defines the self. The person is no longer asking, "Will I survive this?" They are asking, "How will I survive this?" The question itself has shifted. Importantly, this new self-reliance does not eliminate the need for connection. Survivors still seek support, intimacy, and belonging. The difference is structural. Their stability no longer rests entirely outside them. There is an internal reference point that remains even when others falter. They can love without dependency. They can connect without fusion. And this is where the final truth emerges. One of the least understood realities of surviving extreme emotional pain is that strength and sensitivity often grow together in the same person at the same time. From the outside, survivors may appear more resilient, more capable, more steady, more composed under pressure. And they are. They have endured experiences that once felt unsurvivable, but internally, another change often unfolds simultaneously. Increased emotional sensitivity. The nervous system becomes more attuned to threat, to absence, to subtle shifts in relational safety. What others experience as minor tension can register for them as meaningful risk. This is not fragility in the ordinary sense. This is perception shaped by memory. This is the paradox that defines the survivor. The same experiences that cultivated endurance also expanded sensitivity. They can hold intense emotion without collapse, yet they may also feel deeply affected by nuances others overlook. They can remain present in crisis, yet carry heightened awareness of how easily what matters can fracture. Strength and tenderness coexist, sometimes uneasily. This is not a contradiction. This is the actual texture of wisdom. There is also a shadow side to all of this that must be named honestly. Trust may rebuild slowly. Emotional scars can persist as caution. Even in safety, parts of the psyche may remain alert, scanning for echoes of past harm. Relationships can feel both precious and precarious at once. The survivor does not fear feeling itself. They fear losing again what once mattered. And yet, despite all that has been endured, something remarkable remains. They did not seal themselves entirely against attachment or meaning. They remain responsive, affected, alive to connection. This is the final threshold, the choice that only the survivor can make. After everything, after all the pain and disorientation and reconstruction and grief, the person must decide something fundamental about how they will relate to life. Will they allow what happened to close them, or will they allow it to deepen them? Many survivors choose the latter. They choose what might be called moral resilience, the decision to let experience deepen rather than harden the heart, to hold realism without surrendering compassion, to acknowledge darkness without living inside it. They rebuild trust, knowing it can break again. They open their hearts, knowing they can be hurt. They believe in connection, knowing it is fragile. And they do this not from naivety, but from a hard, one understanding that the alternative, a closed heart, a protected life, is not actually a life at all. These are the people you see in the world, moving with a quiet steadiness, a softness that does not come from never being wounded, but from having been wounded and chosen to remain open anyway. Their strength is not the strength of invulnerability. It is the strength of vulnerability consciously chosen again and again as an act of love and faith. If parts of this reflection feel familiar to you, you might carry your own form of this hard, one strength. And if you do, I want you to know something. You are not alone here. Your story matters. The strength you carry, quiet as it is, shapes the world in ways you may never fully see. It softens other people. It gives permission for others to be real. Your survival is not small. Your choice to remain open is not weakness. It is one of the most courageous things a human being can do. If this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself or someone you love in these words, consider subscribing to this channel. Your voice, your insight, your truth about what you have learned after surviving what once felt unbearable. These matter. Share your story in the comments below, because healing is not a solitary journey. It happens in the spaces where we recognize each other, where we say, I see your strength, I see your tenderness, I see you, and you have always been worthy of being seen. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to remain alive.